We're going to continue with our Explore God theme today, and I love the topic. It suits me to a T. Is Christianity too narrow? This is kind of a conversation starter. The whole Explore God idea is, by the way, Steve's handing out some places to fill in the blanks if you choose to do that. Otherwise, you can take that and you can enjoy lining your birdcage or whatever. Doesn't matter to me. Anyway, the whole idea behind the Explore God is how do we be witnesses in the world when there's a world that's got a little bit of a negative view of Christianity, or doesn't know what to make of Christianity. But I want to begin this morning by just asking you a question. What do you call this? This thing that we're doing? Church. What else do we call it? Worship. If you're out in the world and you talk about New Heritage, what do you call it? Church. Okay. Did anybody use the word family? Yeah. I mean, family's kind of my family, my church family, my extended family. This looks a whole lot like my family. We sit on kind of the opposite ends of the sofa at our house. Philip was staying with us one time, and he comes in, and Deanna and I are typing like crazy on our electronic devices, and we were texting. He said, "Who are you talking to?" And we said, "Each other." We had actually been engaged in a conversation with Wendy, and we didn't know. Wendy was carrying on two conversations at once, one with me and one with her. And Wendy left the conversation, but Deanna and I just kept going with it. So for a while. I would really like, this is going to be a discussion time today. I'd like for all of you to let's gather down here so we're a little closer and act like we even like each other. Can we do that? Can I get everybody sort of just in these first 3 or 4? You guys don't have to move. David, you're good. By the way, David Hooker's here. Thanks, David. Yay. Good to have David here. Anyway, Alex's grandmother's here. Yay. Welcome. Anyway, we're just going to kind of sit here and visit a little bit. I'm going to ask Henry, if he would, to throw up the next slide. And we're going to do a little bit of an exercise here. I want you to take a look at the words up there and tell me what they have in common. Oh, this is nice. Thank you. What do those words have in common?
They're all human-made.
Oh, they're all human-made. Okay. Is there a commonality in those words? They're actually taken from a list I found on Huffington Post. Those are all words that have, in the last 200 years, totally changed their meanings. Awful. When we hear the word awful, what do we think of? Bad. Used to mean full of awe. We talked about God being, when we thought about God, it was awful. We were filled with awe. Gay. Happy. People ask you if you're gay now, what do you say? No. Even if you're the happiest person on the planet, you say no. Well, at least some of us say no. Fantastic. It's one of Steve and my favorite words. How are you doing today? Fantastic. That means imaginary. Or it used to mean imaginary. It's not real. It was only in your mind. Which, with Steve and I, probably is true. I'm not going to go into rubber. Except in England, a rubber is still an eraser or something you wear in your feet on a rainy day. Thong? Flip-flops. That's right. It's shoes, sandals, right? Not undergarments. Backlog. Used to only have one meaning. It's the log that got locked into the stream flow that kept all the other logs from flowing downstream. For us today, it means a whole lot of work to do, right? Inmate. Used to be a person, any person that took up a temporary residence. So if you had a boarding house or you had a hotel or you had a rental house, the person that lived there was an inmate, as opposed to a resident who was more permanent. It was temporary. Hilarity. This is my favorite one. Used to mean solemn joy. Wow. You talk about a flip-flop. Manage. The age in which a man becomes a man. Man age. And you only put people that are in man age in positions of responsibility, authority. Man age. Now I'm going to throw one more up, Henry. What about that word? I would make an argument that that one has changed meaning more than any other word. So I'm going to give you the short sermon. Is Christianity too narrow? With a caveat, I'm going to say absolutely yes. A lot of it depends on which brand and who's defining it. So I want you to hold on to those words and that word a little bit as we go through our discussion today. And talk about a subject. I love this idea of exploring God, and especially this subject, because we can go anywhere we want to go with this. A lot of us here know Mike Washburn. Mike was at the Hills. We did a lot when we were discussing our relationship with the Hills. Mike was our go-to person. Mike and I were college classmates at Lubbock Christian together. His first wife, Mike has had the misfortune of losing 2 wives to cancer. His first wife, Sharon, was a dear, dear lady. Her maiden name was Boren, and her daddy's name was Maxie. This means nothing to most of you in here. Maxie Boren was a preacher in the denomination I grew up in, and was somewhere just a little bit right of Attila the Hun. Okay, you talk about a narrow-minded person. Okay, well, my pastor at the time was a man named Joe Barnett, who was a good friend of Maxie. Joe was not nearly where Maxie was, but he also had watched Mike grow up. And when Maxie found out that Mike and Sharon were serious, he called Joe and he said, "How liberal is he?" Liberal is a word that means anybody that doesn't see the world the way I do or is more open-minded than me, right? And Joe, in a fit of meanness, said, "All I can say is he's not near as conservative as you are." And he hung up the phone. And for about a week, every day, Maxie would call and leave Joe a message with the secretary. He'd say, "Please call me back, and exactly what do you mean by not as conservative as me?" He obsessed over it. And finally, Joe called him back and he said, "Maxie, do not worry about it. Jesus was not as conservative as you are." Jesus was the answer to the question for Maxie. So I'm going to ask you now, how do you define Christianity? I don't want the Sunday school answer. I want, in your mind, in your intellectual honesty, how do you define Christianity? Follower of Jesus?
Love, in my mind.
Love, okay. An institution. Would any of us begin to, how does the world define Christianity? How do your neighbors, your friends define Christianity? If you what's the dictionary definition? What is Christianity? How does it start? It is a what? Religion. It's a religion. It is a religion, and to the world it's a religion, and quite frankly, I think to a lot of us, if people ask you what your religion is, Christian. But I'm going to make an argument that that's really not what God intends on any level. As a matter of fact, I would argue that Christianity is really more of a philosophy, or that what Jesus came to do was to bring about more of a philosophy than a religion. And I think that's the way we ought to approach. This is Terry Cartwright speaking. I'm going to try to make an argument, a case for it, because I'm working really hard, and I do this a lot at the university, to deny Christianity. Because I think it's a lie. Years ago, a man named Landon Saunders, and I've told this story so many times, a lot of you heard it. Landon Saunders, who lives in the Northeast, and had a radio program on for years and years and years called Heartbeat, out of Hartford, Connecticut. It was associated with a larger organization called the Herald of Truth, but it was a radio program. And everybody listened to Heartbeat. I mean, people that had no religious background at all. And he would get interviewed a lot on TV and different places. And he was interviewed one time, and this was in the late 70s. He was asked if he was a born-again Christian. And he said, no, absolutely not. Well, he got in all kinds of trouble with the parent company. And he said, I meant it. Because at the time, a popular person in the world, well, the president was Jimmy Carter, and his sister was Jean Stapleton Carter. And she really helped make a national phrase out of the word born-again Christian. But he said there was a whole lot that she was espousing that he didn't agree with, and everybody was sort of latching onto it, and it was kind of representative of a very narrow worldview. And he said, if that woman asked me that question, it was going to put a label on me that I could not shake. Because it is like the word gay. I think, generally speaking, I am gay most of the time, in the original sense of it. But I do not want people to label me that way. Not that I hate gay people, no. It's just that I'm not. It's misleading. And Christianity as a word is misleading. Because it depends on what brand you're talking about. Does that make sense? I would much rather think of it as a philosophy. So I'm going to make a case for the next few minutes, and with your help, for us dumping Christianity. Let's just dump it. Religion by nature is a human process. This is the Oxford English Dictionary beginning definition, a specific fundamentals of religion, a specific fundamental set of beliefs and practices generally agreed upon by a number of persons or sect. Is that what Jesus died for? Is that what Jesus came to establish? As a matter of fact, the Scriptures do not hold a very high view of religion. As a matter of fact, the word is only used 6 times from Genesis to Revelation, and all but one time it's in a negative light. The religious leaders, the prophets, talk about your religious leaders, and it's always people who want to have authority, people who want to have control, people who want to kind of press you into a box. The only time that it is spoken of really positively is in James 1:27. Henry, throw that up there. One more time. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep themselves unpolluted by the world. But if you think about that definition by James, it's based upon what? A preconceived notion of what? That religion is what? Not this religion, but if religion that is pure and undefiled is this, then what is religion in general? Defiled. So even in the most positive light, it's answering a negative question. Even James did not want the people to lock into religion unless they were practicing pure and undefiled religion. Jesus had real issues with the religious because they were too narrow. And in the eve before he went to Jerusalem to die, he brought together religious leaders. I mean, he spoke out to the religious leaders in Matthew chapter 23, and there's this great long list of woes. And if you read the woes, they're all against religion. Let's just take a few samples. 21:15. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you've succeeded, you make him twice as much the child of hell as you are. That is not what I want to be associated with. Skip down to verse 23. Woe to you, teachers of the law, Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat to swallow a camel. You are so narrow-minded that you can't see the beauty of God's nature for all of your laws and all of your codes and all of your policies. Woe to you, teachers of the law, you Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish. You make an image of what you want people to think you are, but inside, you're full of greed and self-indulgence. Here's an eye-opening statistic. Next to the federal government, the one organization, in a big sense, that generates more income than anybody is religion. You take away the lands that the federal government owns and the lands that large corporations own as a whole, the next big owner of property in the world is, quote, the church. While governments tend to run in a deficit all the time, the church has always got a surplus worldwide. And people still go hungry. And people still go homeless. And Jesus is saying, no, blind Pharisees. Clean up the inside of who you are. Then worry about the image, or maybe the image takes care of itself. So where do we go with all of this? Even the word Christian, which is, by the way, Christianity is never found in Scripture. And the word Christian is only used 3 times. And twice, it's used negatively. The Christians were first, the disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. Who was calling them that? The Christians weren't calling themselves that. That's what the outsiders were calling them. It was a derogatory term. It later became adapted so that Peter would later say, this is what Christians are. But Jesus did not come to establish a religion. He came to establish a worldview. The definition of philosophy is a rational investigation of the principles of being, knowledge, and conduct. This is how you behave. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Now that I've sort of rattled the cage a little bit, what's going on in your head?
It's not upsetting. I mean, to me, everything you've said, I mean, when I think of religion, I think of institutions, I think of organizations, but really, for me, it's always been about Jesus.
Okay.
It's always been about him. It's always been about what he said and what he did. And for me personally, Jesus was the thing that allowed me to really establish a relationship with God. I think without Jesus, I don't think I would have been able to do that. So for me, it seems very obvious that he was trying to teach us how to do the same thing he had done.
Okay, good. Just,
Well, I'm just thinking back to the 60s with Jesus freaks. Did they have it right?
I think they absolutely had it right. Yes. This is about Jesus. This isn't about, I keep going back to, I've attributed the quote to Soren Kierkegaard, and I remember I found it somewhere and I have not been able to re-establish it. So maybe I just made it up. But if Kierkegaard didn't say it, he should have. And that is the problem with most middle-class Christianity, is that we substitute the mission of Christ for the preservation of our institution. It's all about keeping the business going. We have to remind ourselves that what killed Jesus was the fact that he tried to destroy the business of religion. And so, as a great conversation starter, it seems like it makes sense to me when somebody says, well, what religion are you? To say, I'm really not a religion. I really don't belong to a religious group. I tell people in our new employee orientation at the university all the time, one of the first things we do is we have everybody greet the person next to them and tell them a little about why they made a decision to come to the university, what their role is going to be at the university. And then the last question is, tell people something about yourself that you don't mind them knowing. And I always kick it off by saying, my one thing I want everybody to know is I'm a recovering pastor. Sometimes I say I'm a recovering religious addict, because a whole lot of my life was spent trying to bolster up the company, being a company man, versus, now I will also go on to say, because it nearly always comes up, what did you mean by recovering pastor, or what do you mean religious addict? Is it really true what they say about state institutions, that you can't live your faith out in public? And I say, no, understand, I still am a follower of Jesus. I'm a student of Jesus. But there's a whole lot about religion that just is unappealing. And I grew up having to apologize for a lot of stuff, especially in the denomination I was in. I remember at Rotary Club, people would ask me, now who are you? You're one of our 2 clergymen that we allow into this thing. Now, exactly who are you? And I said, well, I'm at the Pittman Creek Church. Oh, yeah, you're the guys that don't believe in music. Well, actually, I prayed a lot that certain people didn't hear my answer. Yeah, I always thought that was kind of goofy. And it dawned on me one day, why do I have to apologize? There's so much about Christianity that I have to apologize for. It's become, for a lot of people, it's become almost a political party. Or a set of rules.
Sounds a little pharisaical.
It sounds, no, it does not sound a little pharisaical. It sounds a lot pharisaical. Richard?
Kind of getting back to the original question, isn't the term Christianity too narrow?
Ooh, excellent.
Because if you look at our faith, it's not just to follow Jesus. What was Jesus doing? He was trying to get us back into a relationship with God.
Right.
And if all we're doing is getting into a relationship with Jesus, we're missing it.
Right. Excellent. Principles of being, knowledge, and conduct that has its roots in the divine mover, God. Excellent. Now, we say all that. Go ahead.
A lot of way when someone asked you what you are. Or
Right.
when Gary and I moved to Germany, our landlady, we had a bit of a language barrier. And so we were talking one day and she wanted to know what church I went to.
Right.
And I thought about it, and then I just said, I'm a Christian. She jumped up, she hugged me, and she said, good, good. We had a Baptist live in this house. I'm like, well, I'm glad I didn't explain it.
And that's if I have to explain it, then I got a problem. But I think that's the whole point of this Explore God thing. Part of it is to get people engaged in a conversation. Now, there are people come up to me and say, I'm a Christian. And I don't mind engaging the conversation from that point on, that I'm also Christian. But we're talking about a population right now. Do you realize that on any given Sunday morning in Collin County, about 80% of the people don't go to church? And there's a growing number of people who sort of had it with religion. I'm one of them. So I don't want to, again, give them the wrong idea, because when somebody walks up to me and says, well, I'm a Christian, I thought, folks, I'm going to say this here because I'm not going to get fired. When they say that, I say, crap. I do not want to go there with you because I know this is going to be trouble. We're going to sit here and talk for an hour about things we don't agree on. If somebody comes up to me and says, I find Jesus fascinating, me too. I wish I could get it better. But in all of this, somebody's going to bring up the most natural thing. And that is, didn't Jesus say it was narrow? In the Sermon on the Mount? Henry, put up the next point. Oh, no. I'm going to back up. Sorry, forget that. Let's talk about, go ahead, bring that one up. I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we go there, listen to Jesus' words. This is after he gives us the great funeral text. You know the great funeral text? Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, also believe in me. In my Father's house are many mansions, blah, blah, blah. Then Thomas says, Lord, we don't know where you're going. So how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know the Father as well. Getting back to what Richard was saying. Jesus is the conduit pointing us to God. If you really know me, you'll know my Father as well. From now on, you do not know him. Oh, you know him and you have seen him. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. And Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip, even after I've been among you for such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? If I can imitate what Jesus did, if I can live like Jesus did, then I live like the Father wants me to live. The Old Testament is just full of the history of people not getting it right. And Jesus comes along and says, let's make this right. Let me show you what this looks like. That's where we get to the point that Jesus says it's narrow. Next slide. Thank you. He preached a narrow way, and it comes out of the Sermon on the Mount. He preached this philosophy that this is a very narrow road. What does he say in Matthew chapter 7? Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. And many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. So what does that say? How have you traditionally interpreted that passage?
Don't follow the crowd.
Don't follow the crowd. Oh, see, that's an outsider speaking. Chris, I hate this for you, that you can't speak our language. That is your greatest strength. And I applaud you for being able to see it a different way. How did most of us grow up with that passage?
Not many of you going to make it.
Make it where? And how many, and then what the other side of that? You're going to all go to hell. And there's my case in point right there. Jesus said, you know, I don't know how many are many and how many are few, but I'm guessing it's at least a 1-to-4 ratio. 144,000. That's pretty narrow. There you go. Only 144,000 make it. He's not talking about heaven and hell. Nowhere does heaven and hell come up in there. It's not a heaven or hell discussion. It is a life discussion. There's a whole lot of roads you can take to mess your life up, folks. Just about any option out there that the world says is a good option is going to screw something up. How many ways can you mess up your life? Let's talk about some ways you can mess up your life. You know, please do not hear any comment from this point forward as an experience of the person that says it, okay? Just how many ways can you mess up? What are some ways people mess up their lives? Alcohol. How else?
Just abuse.
Abuse. Yeah, they're abusing other people or allowing themselves to be abused. What else? Finances. I'm sorry? Just selfishness. Just, this is all about me. I tell you, yesterday, folks, was awful. Watching the Ranger game was awful. And I looked at my wife and I said, they screwed that up just to make me mad. And she reminded me once again, it's not all about you, honey. You know.
Most of the game they did. They just waited till the end.
But that was the part I was waiting for, and they messed it up. They heard me yelling, and they messed it up. And I'm not superstitious, but I can't watch them anymore. Because every time I watch them, they say, Cartwright's on, let's screw this thing up. We get selfish. We internalize so much. That messes things up. What else do we do to mess things up?
Instant gratification.
Like a Ranger win. Instant gratification. On the other hand, what does it take for us to lead a full, productive, happy, meaningful, purposeful life? And by the way, Jesus says it a bunch, but the reality is all major world religions have a founder that says it basically. And if you read anything about success, it's pretty much the secret to success.
Take yourself out of the picture.
Bingo. The way we make a difference is to focus on other people and not on ourselves. That's pretty narrow. So the question is Christianity too narrow? Christianity as a religion is way too narrow. But Christianity, the following of Christ is really very simple. It really boils down to two things. And it is our theme. Hear, O Israel, the Shema. The Lord our God is one. And you are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. And the second is namely this: love your neighbor as yourself. And love is not about a good feeling. It is about doing for others what you would want done for you. So when others ask me, Terry Cartwright, I don't want to put words in your mouth. When others ask me, is Christianity too narrow? My answer is always going to be yes. And quite frankly, I don't see myself as a Christian anymore. I do see myself as a student of Jesus, because he's made life really, really simple for me. Just love other people. Treat them, and we don't say love a lot at the university. I do teach a class, a series of classes called Catch Comet Pride on Customer Service in higher ed. Very proud of that. David Gleason and I worked on that and put it together. And when we Googled it 8 years ago, you could not find the words customer service attached to higher education. It was a non-existent concept, especially in public education. And now a lot of people have borrowed our stuff and have given us credit for it. But at the end of the day, what we talk a whole lot about in that is treating people with dignity and respect. But we do talk about how even customer service has changed. And that's where I'm very hopeful about our culture. Nobody talks about customer satisfaction anymore because that's a dead concept. Think about it. What does satisfactory mean to you?
Completely pleased.
See, for me, it means okay. Think back, those of you that aren't suffering from old-timer's disease, think back when you were maybe in college or when you were first on the dating scene. And you come in, maybe you had a roommate and you had a date, and they said, how was the date? How many of you said, oh, it was satisfactory? It either was awful or fantastic. Awesome, great. You go to a movie that knocks your socks off. What do you say? What do you tell other people? What did you do with the movie? You what? I loved it. You go to a restaurant that just is, the atmosphere's great, the food's great. You get on Facebook, what do you say? It's wonderful. It's awesome. It's great. Dignity and respect do that when you treat other people that way. When you treat people with non-prejudice, regardless of religion, skin color, national origin, ethnicity, language, sexual orientation. When you treat them as human beings with respect, they understand love. So I practice human customer service because I think that's what Jesus practiced. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. Any last parting comments? So, simple thanks. Well, Richard and I, I'm not sure that's a ringing endorsement for either one of us.
I get everything you're saying, and I agree. But still, we're left with that term, Christianity.
Yeah.
And so, where does this leave those of us who may need or want a term? Is this just an opportunity to open up conversation?
I think that's all the Explore God thing is. What I think we have to be, if we are genuine followers. Now, I'm going to offer this up. This is my ADHD talking. I'm going to offer this up, that it may be just fine for some of us because Christianity just sits well with us. I'm thinking that creates a whole lot more discussion again about where we differ than what we have in common. I'd much rather say, I don't like religion. If I start off with that conversation, I can always get in a conversation about what really matters as opposed to, yes, I'm a Christian, and then we got to decipher what I mean by that and what you mean by that. Richard?
I think for our struggle is you're mentioning, we keep looking for something to define us, to use a shorthand to say what I am and what I'm not. And that was part of the whole thing about this Explore God thing, is we're trying to say that, or our history has been, I want to say what I am so that I can say what I'm not. And it's like, I had a conversation on Friday with a gentleman I respect because he was recommended to me, liked him, but in the conversation he talked about being raised Catholic. And then he said, and then I became a follower of Christ in the Baptist church. And I was going, is that because you became Baptist that you were a follower of Christ and they didn't believe in Christ? What happened? But I didn't say anything. I used my smarts and just said, okay.
Great.
Listen to what he had to say, because he was trying to build on the common ground that he found out was a former pastor.
Right.
So we all want to define ourselves, what I am and what I'm not.
Right.
And Jesus is saying, define yourself as a follower of God.
Right. And by what you do, not what you say. Yeah.
Not what you ain't.
Right.
But we got to keep perspective on how we use these terms. I'm thinking now of the kids that stood up this week and got killed because they said they were Christian.
Right.
So somebody comes in and the perspective is totally out of the other.
Sure.
So they ask you, are you?
Context is everything.
Perspective is key.
Yeah. Context is everything. With this, remember, Explore God is about conversation starters. Quite frankly, my life is too short to get into a lot of conversations about with people who are already followers of Christ. I mean, we can sit down and visit and have fellowship about that, but part of my job is to explore these possibilities with people who misunderstand what it means to be a, quote, Christian. And that's what this is really kind of about. And so in those cases, I say I can get a real good conversation going by talking about not being a Christian, but loving Jesus. Because that's where there's a whole lot of people not going to church who love Jesus, that they just don't like religion. Yeah. Good. Well, I'm done. There's not really a good ending to this other than thank you. And let's all stand and remind ourselves that we're supposed to have a great week this week, whether we want to or not.